Most startups fail not because the idea is bad, but because the founders waste time, energy, and money building something nobody wants. It is not execution that kills them. It's premature execution based on flawed assumptions. This is a summary of the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank and Bob Dorf, an independent summary created for educational purposes. If this summary resonates with you, I encourage you to purchase the full book and explore it in greater depth. This book is a step-by-step guide to building a successful startup, not by writing business plans or chasing revenue targets too early, but by treating your idea as a hypothesis to be tested, refined, and proven through direct customer engagement. It introduces the customer development methodology, showing how startups differ fundamentally from established businesses and need an entirely different playbook. Whether you're building a web platform, a physical product, or something in between, this book lays out a repeatable framework to increase your odds of building something that customers actually want. At its core, the book rejects the old myth that a startup is just a small version of a big company. Big companies execute known business models. Startups, on the other hand, are in search mode, searching for a scalable, repeatable, and profitable business model. This fundamental distinction means that standard tools like 5-year forecasts, org charts, and marketing plans don't just fall short in a startup setting. They're actively harmful. Startups need a different toolkit. The heart of that toolkit is customer development. Customer development is a disciplined process of turning guesses into knowledge by talking to real users. It begins with identifying your riskiest assumptions about customers, problems, pricing, and channels, and then testing those assumptions as quickly and cheaply as possible. This isn't a side activity, it's the startup's job. In the traditional product launch model, founders write a business plan, raise capital, build a product, and go to market, all without proving that their assumptions are true. This approach is tempting because it feels focused and productive, but it's a mirage. You could spend millions building something impressive that no one buys. The authors argue that this old model is a roadmap to failure. The smarter path is to validate assumptions early and often before scaling anything. The book opens by illustrating this point with the cautionary tale of Webvan, a grocery delivery startup that raised nearly $1 billion, built enormous infrastructure, and went bankrupt within 2 years. Webvan's team executed their plan flawlessly. Warehouses were built, trucks were ordered, software was written, but no one stopped to ask the most important question. Do enough people want this? The startup followed the traditional launch playbook, which rewarded speed and execution over learning and adaptation. In contrast, companies like Peapod and Tesco took a slower, more iterative approach and ended up building sustainable businesses. Blank and Dorf then introduced the 4 key stages of the customer development process: customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and company building. These stages reflect the transition from pure exploration to scalable execution. Customer discovery is about translating the founder's vision into a series of testable hypotheses and then getting out of the building to interview potential customers. This stage isn't about proving you're right. It's about discovering whether your assumptions are valid. You learn not just what customers say they want, but what they actually do, value, and pay for. The aim is not just to gather feedback, but to understand the customer's world deeply enough to build something they truly need. Customer validation comes next. If discovery was about finding a problem worth solving, validation is about proving you've found the right solution. You build a minimum viable product and attempt to sell it. You don't scale yet, you're still learning. This phase tests whether you can consistently acquire, convert, and retain real paying customers. If your solution is wrong or your customer segment is off, you pivot and go back to discovery. Only when you've proven that the model works do you move forward. Customer creation and company building are where traditional business tools finally become useful, but only after you've earned them. You scale marketing, hire specialists, and build out departments only when you know what works. The authors are clear. Premature scaling kills startups. You do not add complexity, burn rate, or headcount until your business model is validated. A central principle throughout is that startups are experiments. That means failure is not just inevitable, it is essential. If you're not failing, you're not testing aggressively enough. But those failures must be fast, cheap, and instructive. The goal is to minimize the cost of being wrong while maximizing learning. The book also emphasizes the importance of founder-led learning. Many startups make the mistake of delegating customer conversations to the sales or marketing team. That's a mistake. In the early stages, the founders must be the ones talking to customers. No one else can absorb the nuances, emotional triggers, and unspoken needs that shape good product decisions. The early company must be structured around learning, not execution. That's why the authors recommend avoiding traditional job titles like VP of Sales or Head of Marketing until you've nailed the model. Hiring a VP of Sales before you know what you're selling is like hiring a pilot before you've built the plane. Another key concept is the rejection of the business plan as a guiding document. Blank and Dorf argue that a startup's business plan is little more than a collection of guesses. Instead of treating it like a roadmap, founders should treat it like a hypothesis sheet. They recommend using the business model canvas, a one-page framework that breaks the business model into key components, and treating each box as a guess to be tested. By working through this canvas using customer development, founders gradually turn assumptions into facts. They learn who their real customers are, what problem they're trying to solve, and what solution actually works. This ongoing feedback loop creates a tight integration between product development and customer learning, which in turn informs future iterations. With the foundational mindset of testing over planning firmly established, the book dives deeper into the mechanics of how startups can actually carry out this iterative search for a business model. One of the most important tools introduced is the concept of getting out of the building, a phrase repeated throughout the book like a mantra. It means that founders cannot rely on brainstorming sessions, spreadsheets, or even intuition alone. The real insights, the ones that make or break a startup, are out in the real world, in conversations with potential customers who are already trying to solve the problem you think you're addressing. This approach flies in the face of the stealth mode thinking that many startups use to follow. In that model, founders would hide their product from the world until launch day, hoping for a dramatic debut. Blank and Dorf argue that this secrecy is counterproductive. Instead, they promote early and frequent exposure to customer feedback. The first version of your product should not be polished or complete. It should be intentionally rough, barely functional if needed, just enough to test a few critical assumptions. This early release, often referred to now as a minimum viable product, is the fastest way to learn what matters and what doesn't. Importantly, these early experiments are not about validation alone. They're also about discovery. Founders often come in with strong beliefs about who their customer is, what their problem looks like, and why their product is the answer. But in most cases, the reality is more complex. You may discover that the people you thought were your primary users are actually not interested, while a different group is desperate for your solution. Or you may learn that the problem exists, but customers are already solving it in a way that feels good enough, which means your value proposition needs to be much stronger. The authors also highlight how dangerous it is to conflate interest with commitment. Early customer interviews may include a lot of polite nodding, curiosity, and even compliments. But none of that matters unless it translates into real behavior. A sign-up, a pre-order, a purchase, or even just an agreement to try a basic prototype. That is why they stress measuring actual customer actions over opinions. Talking to customers is necessary, but only as a prelude to seeing what they do when given the opportunity to engage with the product. Another major theme is how startups should treat failure. In the corporate world, failure is something to be avoided or covered up. But in a startup, failure is baked into the process. If your early assumptions are not failing, you're either not pushing hard enough or not asking the right questions. The customer development model reframes failure as learning. Every invalidated assumption is a gift. It means you're one step closer to a model that works. The only real mistake is ignoring what the data tells you or continuing to execute a flawed plan out of stubbornness or sunk cost bias. This process also places enormous responsibility on the founders themselves. Blank and Dorf make it clear that in the early days, there is no substitute for founder involvement. No one else can navigate the emotional weight of pivoting, the strategic implications of changing a customer segment, or the gut-level judgment calls that shape the business. The early startup team must be lean, cross-functional, and completely aligned around learning. Traditional hierarchies and silos are not just inefficient. They're dangerous at this stage because they slow down communication and lock people into rigid roles when flexibility is crucial. Once the team has tested enough hypotheses and built a product that early customers are not just willing but eager to adopt, the company can shift toward customer validation. This is the critical moment where startups either pivot or proceed. In validation, the focus is no longer on exploration alone. Now it's about proving that what you have is repeatable and scalable. Can you consistently find new customers? Can you convert them at reasonable cost? Can you deliver the product or service efficiently? If so, you're no longer guessing, you are building. However, if you cannot achieve consistent traction, this is the moment to change course. Pivoting does not mean starting over from scratch. It means making a significant shift in one or more parts of the business model based on what you have learned. Maybe you need to target a new customer segment, change the pricing model, simplify the product, or shift the sales strategy. These are not signs of failure. They are part of the normal search process. The worst thing a startup can do is stay on a flawed path out of pride, optimism, or pressure to stick to a plan that no longer fits reality. Throughout this phase, metrics become essential, but not vanity metrics like website visits or downloads. The authors push for actionable metrics, numbers that actually reflect customer behavior and business health. How many new users become repeat users? How much does it cost to acquire each one? What percentage of users refer others? These are the numbers that indicate whether a startup is building something sustainable. If the metrics look good and the growth seems organic and healthy, then, and only then, does it make sense to begin building a larger team, spending more on marketing and preparing to scale operations. As the startup prepares to move from search to execution, Blank and Dorf warn founders not to fall into the trap of declaring success too early. It is easy to get excited about a few wins, raise funding, and start acting like a big company. But if the core model is not truly validated, this shift will only magnify existing weaknesses. Instead, they advocate a disciplined transition, one that only begins once the startup has clearly and consistently demonstrated that it understands its customers, solves a real problem, and can deliver its solution at scale. Once a startup reaches the point where its business model has been validated through real-world testing and repeatable customer behavior, the shift toward execution can begin. But even here, the authors emphasize caution. Scaling prematurely, whether through hiring, marketing, or operational expansion, remains one of the biggest dangers for young companies. Scaling should not be driven by optimism, pressure from investors, or arbitrary timelines. It should be based on clear data showing that your startup has found product-market fit and knows how to reliably reach and convert customers. In this phase, founders begin to transition from explorers into builders. The startup evolves into a more traditional company, with formal departments, defined roles, and growing headcount. However, the authors urge founders to retain the learning culture that made the startup successful in the first place. Just because the model has been proven once does not mean it will never need to change. Markets shift, competitors emerge, customer needs evolve. Startups that grow into adaptive companies stay curious, keep listening, and continue to iterate. even when the stakes are higher. Blank and Dorf also make a strong case for focusing on metrics and milestones that align with each stage of the journey. Early on, success is measured by insights gained, assumptions tested, and hypotheses refined. Later, the metrics become more operational: cost of customer acquisition, lifetime value, churn rates, conversion percentages. Knowing which metrics matter at which stage prevents teams from chasing empty wins or making poor strategic decisions based on surface-level success. A recurring theme in the book is how often traditional business advice, while helpful in large organizations, actively sabotages startups. For example, hiring seasoned executives too early may seem impressive, but if they're trained in execution and not in search, they often struggle with the uncertainty and flexibility required in an early-stage venture. Similarly, writing a detailed 5-year business plan might satisfy investors, but it offers a false sense of security when almost every key assumption is still unproven. The book encourages founders to resist these pressures and focus instead on evidence, what customers actually do, not what stakeholders want to believe. One of the most practical contributions of the book is its insistence on real-time customer engagement. This includes structured interviews, observation, testing, landing pages, early prototypes, A/B experiments, and analytics tools that help track real behavior. It's not enough to assume customers will respond. The data must prove it. The founders need to be willing to discard their own favorite ideas if the data shows they are wrong. This humility, combined with persistence, is what sets great founders apart from average ones. The final chapters of the book walk through variations of the customer development process for different types of startups, including web/mobile businesses, physical product companies, and enterprise-focused ventures. The tools are adapted depending on the speed of customer feedback, the nature of the distribution channel, and the cost of building a minimum viable product. But the core philosophy stays the same: validate before you scale. Perhaps the most important mindset shift the book demands is a total reframing of what it means to be a successful founder. It is not about getting everything right from the start. It is about being disciplined enough to test your assumptions, brave enough to admit when you're wrong, and focused enough to follow the data wherever it leads, even if it means letting go of your original vision. In other words, success is not about certainty. It is about continuous learning. Here are 5 practical, memorable takeaways from the book. 1. Startups are not small versions of big companies. They are temporary organizations in search of a repeatable and scalable business model. 2. Your initial business plan is just a collection of guesses. The goal is to turn those guesses into facts through real-world testing and customer engagement. 3. Founders must get out of the building to gather insights. Direct conversations with customers are more valuable than assumptions or spreadsheets. 4. Do not scale your team, operations, or marketing until you have proven, with data, that your product solves a real problem for a real customer segment. 5. Treat failure as feedback. Every invalidated hypothesis gets you closer to a model that works, if you're willing to pivot and learn. You've listened to a summary of the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank and Bob Dorf, created independently for educational purposes. If it resonated with you, consider buying the full book to explore it in greater detail. Well done for listening to the end. Have a cup of tea, relax, and let the ideas settle in.